Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss Firestarter Rekindled, starring Margaret Monroe, Malcolm McDowell, and Dennis Hopper, directed by Robert Iscove. Now let's just get straight into this since I've never seen this, and I know it's a TV movie, but let's see how this goes. Let's get into it. We open with a terrible sounding Universal logo, and the McGee's being attacked by some government agents from the dream of Charlie McGee, played by Margaret Monroe, is an adult as she accidentally burns her bed sheets when she sees John Rainbird, played by Malcolm McDowell, who is the best presence in this entire show, but the dream sequence felt pretty weird. We meet Vincent Sforza, forgive me if I said that wrong, while not visiting his father for personal reasons. I'll get to later in the show, as he works for John himself, as we'll learn later in the show, as he has no choice but to track down Charlie while Charlie is working at a library. And honestly, these characters are terrible, as the actors acted cheap in this show, in this entire show, let's say. Vincent is looking for an address as he goes to the library Charlie works at, as he looks for files to find Charlie, as he spends all day looking through them. And is this the best TV has got so far, as far as making a sequel to a movie that was 18 years old by 2002? Because oh my god, it looks super cheap. Charlie goes to a bar to dance and finds a man who straight up kisses her right out the bat. And as they go outside and have a brief sexual intercourse, then all of a sudden she feels fire coming as she doesn't want to hurt the guy. As she leaves, and these effects look terrible for the TV. So what do you expect? Vincent sees a video of people melting down at the hospital as he sees Charlie in the same video while Charlie is at work and sees some files went missing, and she finds Vincent at a house of one of the nurses as he learns about Charlie. While this isn't a direct sequel to the original Firestarter, which pissed me off, Charlie enters when he sees some footage of her starting fire and burning up some government agents, and Charlie gets dizzy, and the flashback looked rather ludicrous and translate on this show, and this so far it's pretty dreadful. John is in a meeting with his business partner Joel, who happens to be Vincent's boss, as he comes back to work with some students that happens to be boys, as he visits one named Cody, as he can hear things with his ears. And Malcolm McDowell is the best performance in this entire show, as I still don't like the character, but his performance was good at best. We get a flashback of something that happened in the first film, where John visits Charlie as he asks of her to use her powers for testing reasons, and we move on to Gil killing a woman whom I swear to God was Charlie, because so far I thought this was a direct sequel to the original movie and didn't know who Charlie was until later on, because she goes by another name. And what was the point of that scene other than showing Gil is one of the fucking villains? Absolutely nothing whatsoever. Charlie and Vincent get kicked out of the house and go to a restaurant to get something like a cheeseburger. And Vincent's brother asks him to see something on the computer that is super paranormal. And Charlie runs out and they talk about what happened on the video. And they talk about Superman, as Charlie likes Batman more because he's an ordinary guy. And they go to visit Vincent's hotel room as Charlie opens an envelope and sees a photo of his father. And that's when we get explained how Vincent never had a father because he grew up without one until he was currently at the hospital. And next thing you know, Vincent and Charlie have sexual intercourse, and she has a meltdown because of her fire starting powers. And their chemistry is toxic. Like, I can't stand how much they have no chemistry whatsoever. Vincent finds out Charlie is her real name instead of Tommy, which was too goddamn obvious. And hell, I couldn't call her Tommy for half the show, as she's really Charlie, and calls his boss Joel and transfers him to John. And Vincent goes to Charlie's apartment to talk with her. She runs away while Vincent thinks his workplace can help her, but John wants to do something else with her as she thinks about it and takes up on his offer. And Vincent tells his boss Charlie is coming as he wants to be there for safety reasons. As Vincent finds out something different, and they killed other people he found all this time, when you worked there, and unfortunately, it's terrible acting, sure, as I'm not convinced. Vincent's brother finds out some men in black are going into his apartment, and he runs, which is a smart move on his choice. Charlie goes to Vincent's workplace and finds John is there, as she has a flashback of her father sitting in a chair all tied up and drugged up, as he says he's lying to her, and she burns him up, which is absolutely dreadful. They hold Vincent hostage as Gil has the gun on him, and Vincent attacks and gets the gun and points it at John. And more government agents come after both Charlie and Vincent as they run, and Vincent tries to explain to Charlie he didn't mean for any of this to happen, as she punches him in to keep him quiet, which was humorous in a not so funny kind of way. They get to the laboratory full of kids with powers like Charlie, and they attack, and they do get Vincent, but Charlie burns one in the foot and gets the others and tied up, and Charlie gets Vincent out of there as they're concerned, and Charlie comes out with her hands up and burns the hallway down as another kid comes in and takes Charlie's hits, but he absorbs her power, which is so stupid. John comes in and Vincent demands Cody to let Charlie go, and he does as Charlie gets out and Gil knocks out Vincent, while Charlie has a vision of her as a little girl telling her to save him, which was so stupid. Charlie meets James Richardson, played by Dennis Hopper, aka an old friend of the family. Not! I'll explain later. Because what he said that I thought was bullshit from the minute he said that when he first showed up on screen, as he was unbelievably a bad character as well. John and Joel have a discussion as he asks too many questions, while John advises him not to ask too many questions, while the kids were talking smack about Charlie, and Cody decides to speak to the other kids, saying she played with him for what reason? I don't know, because this doesn't make any sense. Vincent is stuck on a table by John and a kid named Max as John asks Charlie, and Vincent doesn't give him anything except for risking his brother's life, while Charlie goes with James to a long drive as he can see the future and says Vincent dies. And I thought, yeah, that's bullshit, as anybody that can tell the future is all full of shit in my opinion, as they don't know how to make sense. We learn Cody is an energetic sink as he absorbs life, which feels like a power from Pokemon, as John asks Vincent if he slept with Charlie. And I thought, what kind of a question is that you're interrogating him, as this is now making questionable decisions? Jesus Christ. Charlie goes in a building to ask for John, and she burns a tree and gets inside on her own, at her own risk, and Cody wants to go after Charlie, and then he gets the top kid afraid of him and goes anyways, while Charlie burns part of the door, and she has a dilemma situation to get Vincent out of Charlie's life, and Vincent does escape, and the kids led by Cody let them go, while John goes after them, which bothered me to the point it doesn't make sense either. And this second half isn't making sense at all. The woman that Gil killed earlier, whose name is Mary, as the film happens to be as she happens to be alive, telling the FBI that Gil wants her dead with John, as she's sucking the life out of herself and wounds herself. And what the fuck was the point of that scene with her, as it shouldn't be in the show? John is mad at the kids, and Gil comes in and decides to have him killed. For what purpose? Because he didn't do what he was supposed to do, which I feel like this is a bunch of bullshit plotting. That's completely full of nonsense, and every shot in both episodes are absolutely fucking dreadful. Joel is afraid to continue working for John as a couple of FBI agents see John as they ask about Mary and something that happened to her about 20 years ago. And John shows them around, and the FBI agents almost arrest John until the FBI agents take him downstairs, which is preposterous. Vincent calls his brother and asks how Mom and Dad are doing, as he promises to visit Dad at the hospital, who he hasn't seen in years, which is not going to happen in the show, and I'll explain why later on, I'll say, and decides to go with Charlie, which is kind of funny in a bad way. Mary identified John and almost kills him, but the FBI agents killed her, which is again pointless. James took Charlie and Vincent to a town where John is at, and unfortunately James betrays them by taking them to his trap, and we get a flashback of James getting manipulated by John, which was so fucking stupid to death, particularly since he got the kids involved in his trap, as it bothers me so bad. Meanwhile, Joel, is in a meeting with the board of directors while John's trap is still going until nighttime, and John wants Charlie to burn down the town, which is what John wants, and one kid blows up the bank by screaming at it, and the kids tear up the town because Charlie doesn't want to use her powers, and the whole town runs, and Vincent almost gets killed by the kids, and Charlie tells them not to kill him, and John kills Vincent as Charlie uses his powers to burn the town, and she damns him by kissing John and burning up his ass up. And Cody wants to take Charlie's powers, and he does to the point it burns him, as well as that entire sequence was stupid as shit. And the last scenes are Charlie telling Vincent's father and brother he was going to visit the father at the hospital, as he was unfortunately killed by John, and all the kids are staying at the building, and Charlie taking a trip to Canada, and the climax is horrible. And at the end of the day, it's an improvement of a Stephen King sequel, but it's still not a good or original as bad as the original movie, I'll say. Now it's time for the rating. I'll give this show a 3.1 out of 10. The show doesn't make sense as far as the plot, nor why they made this show to begin with the effects look absolutely terrible. The acting in this is awful, as these are terrible characters, as Malcolm McDowell is the best thing about the show, and they had no chemistry between each other, and the shots are really dreadful. The show has a bunch of nonsense going around, particularly the second half, and I don't believe their arcs, as this is not an improvement of the Stephen King series in particular, but it's better than the other sequels of those stories, but it's unfortunately still not a good story. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me, and I will be back with the newest version of Firestarter. And until then, liar, liar, pants on fire.